Hello, everyone. This is Focus on English. Yeah.
Today, we'll be exploring the topic of why movie quotes make English idioms stick.
So if you translate the English phrase, costs an arm and a leg, literally like word for word into a foreign language, you do not sound like a normal person complaining about inflation.
No, definitely not. You sound terrifying.
Right. You sound like a horror movie villain who's demanding a ransom in actual body parts.
Which is such a funny image, but it really highlights a big problem.
It does. I mean, when we think about language, we usually picture this pristine blueprint, neat rows of vocabulary, these load-bearing grammar rules, perfectly categorized structure.
Oh, the textbook version of language.
Exactly. But the reality of how human beings actually communicate is a gloriously messy, chaotic landscape. And today, we are looking at the mechanics of how your brain actually absorbs that chaos. Welcome to today's deep dive.
It's great to be here.
We have a fascinating stack of sources to explore for you today, anchored by a really rigorous 2025 linguistic research paper from the Euro-Global Journal of Linguistics and Language Education.
Yeah, that paper is fascinating.
And alongside that hard science, we are looking at some incredibly practical, everyday materials for English learners. Like everything from the bizarre historical origins of financial idioms to mastering tricky vocabulary using, of all things, high-stakes Hollywood movie quotes.
It really is a brilliant combination of materials. I mean, we're looking at the clinical neurological strategies of how a brain acquires a new word and then immediately testing those theories against the absolute weirdness of native speaker conversations.
Because it is weird.
It is. Learning a language, or mastering any complex system for that matter, it's never just about staring at a dry list of terms. It's about understanding the hidden cultural psychology embedded in those words.
And knowing how to make them stick in your brain, right?
Exactly. Knowing the specific cognitive mechanisms to use so that the information permanently wires itself into your memory.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with those cognitive mechanisms. Because before we can even begin to untangle the weird cultural history of idioms, we have to look at the pedagogy of reading.
The science of how we read.
Right. And the 2025 study by researcher Sakin Mehmedli gives us the perfect lens for this. So Mehmedli took 120 intermediate-level learners of a foreign language and divided them into 4 distinct groups.
For very different approaches to reading.
Yeah. You have an extensive reading group, an intensive reading group, an interactive reading group, and a standard control group. And they tracked everyone's progress with pre-tests, post-tests, classroom observations, the whole 9 yards.
It was a very thorough study.
But I have to stop here and challenge the premise of this, because we hear terms like intensive and extensive thrown around constantly in education.
Oh, all the time.
But practically speaking, if I am a student looking at a page, isn't my brain processing the letters and the syntax the exact same way, regardless of what label we slap on the activity? Like, wait, isn't reading just reading? What's the difference between intensive and extensive? Is it like the difference between sprinting 100 meters and casually jogging a marathon?
That is a very common assumption, the sprinting versus jogging idea. But the neurological reality is completely different. The way you instruct your brain to interact with the text physically alters the learning outcome.
Really? Just the instructions change the outcome.
Absolutely. Let's look at intensive reading first.
Yeah.
Often people imagine this as the sprinting, like you said, reading as hard and fast as you can.
Uh-huh.
I would push back on that analogy entirely.
Okay, so what is it then?
Intensive reading is not a sprint. It is an archaeological dig.
Oh, an archaeological dig. I like that.
Yeah, you are moving forward maybe an inch at a time. You are brushing the dust off every single artifact. If you hit a word you don't know, you stop the dig completely.
You don't just skip it.
Never. You pull out the dictionary, you analyze the grammatical structure of the sentence, you parse the exact tense.
So you are intentionally creating friction. You are making the process slower and more difficult.
Yes. The cognitive mechanism at play here relies on that deliberate friction. By stopping and forcing your brain to process the exact definition, you are encoding that specific piece of data into your short-term memory through repetition and focus.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the Mehmedli study proved that this specific archaeological method is unparalleled for vocabulary acquisition. The students in the intensive group showed massive, quantifiable gains in learning and retaining new, isolated words.
But I mean, if you read a whole book that way, you would lose your mind.
Oh, you'd be exhausted.
It would take months, and you'd probably lose the plot of the story by chapter 3.
Which is exactly where extensive reading comes in. If intensive reading is the archaeological dig, Extensive reading is taking a helicopter ride over the entire site to see the shape of the ancient city.
Okay, so a much wider view.
Right. You are focusing on volume, flow, and narrative. When you hit a word you do not recognize, you do not stop, you bypass it completely.
You just guess what it means based on the vibe of the paragraph.
Well, guessing based on the vibe is actually a highly sophisticated neurological process called contextual guessing.
Oh, wow. I didn't know it had a fancy name.
It does. Your brain is rapidly doing probability math based on the surrounding syntax and the narrative tone. And the data from the study shows that this approach massively improves reading comprehension and overall fluency.
Because you aren't bogged down in the detail.
Exactly. Because you are not stopping, you are forcing your brain to build neural pathways that recognize the rhythm and the larger structural patterns of the language. You aren't learning as many specific new words, but you are learning how the language breathes.
Okay, that clarifies the two extremes so well. The intensive dig gets you the individual bricks, and the extensive helicopter ride shows you how the whole wall is built.
That's a great way to put it.
But what did the researchers find with that third group, the interactive reading group? Because that sounds like a curveball.
This is where we introduce the human element, which completely changes the biochemical environment of learning. Interactive reading brings social engagement into the text.
So they aren't just reading alone in a room.
Right. The students are discussing the material, collaborating, reacting to the narrative together. And the study found that this approach caused learner motivation to absolutely skyrocket.
Because it's fun.
Because it's fun. And from a neurological standpoint, when motivation and social engagement are high, your brain releases dopamine.
Which feels good.
Yes, and dopamine acts as a literal save button for memory. They saw substantial improvements in comprehension simply because the learners actually cared about what they were reading.
That is so wild. And you know, if you are listening to this deep dive right now and you are trying to learn a new skill, like say you're trying to learn Python for a new job, or maybe you are diving into the complex jargon of a new industry, this study is handing you the playbook.
It really is.
You cannot just extensively read a coding forum to get the general vibe. If you need the specific syntax, you have to do the archaeological dig.
You have to stop and look up the code.
Right. But if you want to understand the broader trends of the tech industry, you need the helicopter ride. Your strategy has to dictate your results.
The problem, however, is that if you only rely on the intensive archaeological dig, you're eventually going to hit an artifact that makes absolutely no logical sense.
Oh, I know exactly where you're going with this.
Yeah, you can translate every single word perfectly, understand the grammar flawlessly, and still have zero idea what the sentence actually means.
Which brings us to the glorious, frustrating wall that every language learner eventually hits: idioms.
Yes, the dreaded idioms.
Especially in English, native speakers rely on phrases that are completely divorced from literal reality. The source material provided for this deep dive includes a comprehensive breakdown of financial idioms, and looking at them through the lens of this linguistic study is just fascinating.
It is, because money is tied directly to human survival, so it naturally generates incredibly dense, culturally specific language.
It's deeply emotional.
Exactly. When a learner encounters these phrases, the extensive helicopter method of contextual guessing usually fails.
Because the literal words have nothing to do with finance.
Exactly.
Let's look at a few of these from the source, because they are wild. We mentioned costs an arm and a leg earlier in the intro, which is used to describe something almost pricelessly expensive.
Right.
The visual there is so intense, a literal physical sacrifice to represent extreme financial cost. But my absolute favorite on this list is bring home the bacon.
Oh, that's a classic.
It means to earn a living, right? To provide for your family. But I have to ask, why on earth do British and American speakers visualize financial success as pork products?
It does seem strange.
Right. Why not bring home the bread or bring home the water? Something actually essential for survival.
Well, the sources trace this back to the historical realities of wealth in agrarian societies. While someone might try to earn their bread and butter just to survive.
Which is another idiom.
Yeah, exactly. But historically in Britain, bacon was a premium calorie source. It was meat that could be preserved and stored.
Oh, so it wouldn't go bad quickly.
Right. So hanging bacon in your home was a highly visible sign of wealth and stability. It wasn't just dinner.
It was a status symbol.
Yes. So bringing home the bacon signifies not just basic survival, but actual thriving. It is a cultural fossil record.
A cultural fossil record. I love that. And it is not just agricultural history either. Some of these idioms are literal snapshots of antiquated business practices frozen in time.
Like which one?
Like the phrase in the red. If a business is in the red, it means they are losing money, spending more than they earn, and basically heading toward ruin.
Right. And to a modern learner, the color red might arbitrarily signal danger, just culturally, but the phrase is much more literal than that.
It is.
Yeah, the sources explain that this comes directly from 19th century counting books and stock boards. Before digital spreadsheets, accountants meticulously marked profits in green ink and losses in red ink.
Oh, wow. Literally using red ink.
Yes, so being in the red is a physical description of a ledger book from 200 years ago.
That is amazing. And then you have nest egg, which is used to describe a person's life savings. It is this highly specific visual metaphor of an egg kept in the nest, nurtured and protected from predators for the future.
It paints quite a picture.
Or the phrase money to burn, meaning you have so much disposable income that you could literally use it as kindling for a fire without affecting your survival.
Which highlights the absolute necessity of intensive reading when encountering a new culture.
You have to dig for that meaning.
You do. You cannot learn this through mere translation software. The intensive dig is required to uncover the hidden psychology, to realize that this specific culture visualizes wealth as physical sacrifice with the arm and leg, or historical ledger ink, or preserved meat.
So we know that intensive study is required to decode these bizarre idioms. But here's my question. How do we actually wire them into our brains permanently? Because I can do the archaeological dig, I can look up the historical origin of in the red, and then completely forget it by tomorrow morning.
And that happens to learners all the time.
So how do we fix it?
This is where we synthesize the findings from the Mebidley study. We know intensive reading decodes the meaning. But to bypass the brain's natural forgetting curve, we need to introduce the mechanism from the third group.
The interactive group, the social one.
Yes. Interactive, emotional engagement. We need a high-stakes context.
Enter Hollywood.
Exactly.
The practical source materials we have do something brilliant here. They pivot from idioms to phrasal verbs, and they teach this notoriously difficult vocabulary using highly specific, dramatic movie quotes.
Phrasal verbs represent a unique pedagogical challenge. For a learner, they seem entirely arbitrary, which makes them incredibly difficult for the brain to latch onto.
They are completely arbitrary. I have always thought of phrasal verbs as like linguistic transformers.
Linguistic transformers.
Yeah. You take a perfectly innocent, normal verb like pay or put, the brain knows exactly what those mean. Then you snap on a tiny preposition like back or away, and the entire word shape-shifts into a completely different concept.
That is a great analogy.
Right. Because put means to place something somewhere. Put away can mean to send someone to prison. There is no logical bridge there for a learner to walk across.
Not at all, which is exactly why dry memorization fails here. The brain discards arbitrary information very quickly to save energy.
It just dumps it.
Yeah, right. So to force the brain to keep that information, you have to link the arbitrary phrase to a concrete emotional memory. The movie quotes provide that artificial emotional anchor. Let's look at the examples provided in the text.
Okay, the first linguistic transformer we have is to cut down. Specifically, to cut down on. It means to reduce or decrease. And the source illustrates this with a quote from the comedy Paul Blart. Mall Cop.
A classic piece of cinema.
Truly high art. Kevin James's character says, quote, "You see, if we could reroute the customers away from the food court, it's going to help the kiosks and cut down on shopper frustration."
So the mechanism at work here is visualization and humor. Instead of just memorizing a flashcard that says cut down equals reduce, the learner visualizes a chaotic, crowded mall.
Right, Paul Blart on his Segway.
Exactly. They picture the physical act of cutting down the overwhelming volume of angry shoppers. The absurdity of the movie acts as a cognitive hook.
That makes the abstract concept so much more physical. Let's look at one that uses tension instead of comedy. The phrasal verb to pay back.
Okay.
It means to discharge a debt, to exact revenge, or to repay. The source pulls a line from Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained. Quote, "A lot of guys mess around with married women, but you're the only one I know who robs a joint just to pay back the husband."
Notice how the pedagogy shifts here. We are no longer in the realm of clinical definition.
No, it's super intense.
When a learner reads or hears that line, the amygdala, the part of the brain that processes emotion, lights up.
It literally activates the brain differently.
Yes, the high stakes, the implied danger of robbing a joint, the interpersonal betrayal, all of this creates a sense of tension. The brain is biologically hardwired to remember tense, dangerous situations for survival.
Oh, because it thinks I need to remember this so I don't die later.
Exactly. By associating the phrase pay back with that feeling of cinematic tension, the vocabulary bypasses short-term memory and begins to anchor deeply into long-term retention.
It's essentially tricking your brain's survival instincts into memorizing a grammar lesson. That is incredible.
It really is a neat trick.
The material does this again with the phrasal verb to put away, meaning to save, to store, or to hide something permanently. The example is from the thriller Deadfall. Quote, "We put it away, we keep it hidden, we never speak of it again, no one knows it's here."
Well, no one knows it's here, end quote.
The structural repetition in that dialogue is a brilliant pedagogical tool. Put it away, followed immediately by keep it hidden. The script is providing built-in context clues.
It defines the phrase right after using it.
Yes, but again, it is the emotional weight of the secret, the hushed tension of the scene that signals to the brain, hey, this information matters. You just do not get that from a flashcard. You definitely don't. We have one more transformer from the source to pick up. In this context, meaning to rescue, to elevate, or to literally lift someone to safety, the source uses a dramatic climax from V for Vendetta. V says, quote, "After what you did, I couldn't let that happen, so I picked you up and carried you to the only place I knew you'd be safe. Here, to my home."
If we pull all the way back and look at the whole picture, using these Moody quotes bridges the gap between the isolated reading strategies studied by Mehmet and the messy reality of actual communication.
It combines the theories.
It does. It takes the magnifying glass of intensive reading, breaking down the preposition and the verb, and injects it with the social-emotional engagement of the interactive reading group.
So you are taking the dry artifact from the archaeological dig and you are putting it into a high-stakes blockbuster movie scene so you never forget what it looks like.
Exactly. It proves that context is the ultimate driver of comprehension. If you try to learn a complex system in a vacuum, without the cultural history of the bacon and the red ink, or without the emotional resonance of a narrative, your brain will simply refuse to hold on to the data.
It'll just let it go. So, synthesizing everything we've explored in this deep dive, we started with 120 students, proving that how you physically approach a text changes the architecture of your brain.
Right.
We learned that you need the intensive dig for the vocabulary bricks, the extensive helicopter ride for the fluency of the wall, and the interactive social spark to keep you motivated enough to actually finish building the house.
That's a perfect summary. We then proved why that intensive dig is so vital by hitting the wall of financial idioms. We saw that language is not just a tool for communication. It is a cultural fossil record.
Yeah, that blew my mind.
It holds the history of 19th century accountants and British agrarian wealth in everyday phrases.
And finally, we uncovered the ultimate memory hack. By taking those arbitrary, confusing phrasal verbs and snapping them into the emotional, high-stakes context of Hollywood dialogue, we can trick our brains into permanently storing the information.
The takeaway for anyone listening who is trying to master a new skill, a new language, or a new field of study is to constantly vary your approach.
Don't just do one thing.
Never just do one thing. Use the magnifying glass when you need precision. Use the wide-angle lens when you need context. And always look for the emotional or historical narrative behind the data, because that is what makes it stick.
You need the rigid blueprint, but you also absolutely have to see the messy, vibrant house being lived in. Which leaves us with a final, somewhat provocative thought for you to carry into your day.
Oh, I like this.
Think about your own native language, or the highly specific jargon you use in your daily job or your favorite hobby. What bizarre everyday phrases do you throw around constantly, completely without thinking, that would absolutely baffle an outsider who is trying to do an intensive read of your conversations? What is your industry's version of bringing home the bacon?
It is a fantastic exercise in shifting your perspective. It forces you to look at your own daily communication and realize just how wonderfully weird and culturally specific our words truly are.
Once you start looking for those linguistic fossils in your own life, you will never be able to unsee them. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack this beautifully complicated territory today. Keep questioning the words you use, keep looking for the hidden histories buried in your sentences, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.